In Sefer Ha-Aggadah, still on page 54, and talking about the Exodus, now the Midrash speaks about how Pharaoh and the Egyptians felt when the Israelites left. Though the Midrash, Rabbi Levi, provides a very nice analogy. Amar Rabbi Levi, משל לאחד שהייתה לו שדה והיה בה גל של צרורות, עמד ומכרה לאחר בדבר מועט. So there was this man who had a field and it was full of stones. It was not arable, meaning not a land that you could plow. עמד ומכרה לאחר בדבר מועט. So he sold it to someone else for peanuts, for not really a high price. עמד הלוקח והעביר אותו הגל מתוכה ומצא תחתיו מים חיים. The buyer cleared the field, took out all the stones, and under the stones he dug a little bit and he found a spring of fresh water. נטעה גפנים, עשה שורות שורות. נטע בכל מיני בשמים, נטע ברימונים. It's a beautiful description in the Midrash. So now that he has water in the field and he cleared the stones, he invested. This is a classic story. If you have people have a property, they think it's not worth enough, they sell it, but the buyer invests in it, turns it around. So he turned it around. He planted vines in nice lines, and then he planted among the lines herbs to make perfumes from. Meaning, even though it was a limited space, but he used it to the maximum possible. נטע ברימונים, העמידה על קנים, בנה מגדל בתוכה והושיב שומר. So he also planted trees of pomegranate. So interesting, like Rabbi Levi said that understood in agriculture, because the herbs are for perfumes are sort of perennials. They give fruit or leaves quite often. Vineyards take longer to harvest, but it's long term. And pomegranates take time to tend to in the beginning, but in the long term. So you have different levels of investment that he had in the field. He fenced it off with reeds. And he built a watchtower, and he put a guard there. So now, what the original seller sold for pennies, the buyer now has a very profitable property that produces fruits and perfumes and wine. It's a beautiful place. And whoever would pass by the field said, wow, look at this, is an amazing business, an amazing place. And then after a while, the original seller came to visit or passed by his ancient field that he basically threw away, and he saw that it's abundant and produces so much. Amar oili shekach macharti, oili shekach hotzeti miyadi. He says, woe to me, I had this in my hands and I gave it away, I gave it to others for nothing. כך היו ישראל במצרים גל של צרורות, כיוון שיצאו, נעשו פרדס רימונים. So the same thing. Am Yisrael, when they were in Egypt, they were slaves, they were servants. And what they were used for? Building, hard labor. Kevan shiatzu na'asu pardes rimoni, was once they got out, they became an orchard of pomegranates. When you see what Am Yisrael did through the Torah, teaching, learning, the achievements of Jews in the world. Ra'otam par'o. And this is, by the way, this is written 2,000 years ago, when during destruction and exile, that again we're sort of like we're in a low point. But Rabbi Levi has this historical perspective. He says we've been through phases like this before. We've been in exile in Egypt. We've suffered. We came out when we did magnificent things. So he has the hope that and the confidence that this will happen again, and it did. We went through difficult times, but wherever Jews went, were able to, with the power of the Torah and knowledge and study, to invest in commerce, in business, in education, to create things, and that's why we survived the way we survived, and we are today in positions of power around the world. Israel in the field of high tech, knowledge, education, Nobel Prize winners, etc., etc. So, Ra'ot Paro itchil tzoveh. So now the same thing that happens with the fields happened with Am Yisrael. Everyone who sees the Israelites now praises them. Bemor lahem am Hashem eleh ume'artzo yatzau. Those are the people of Hashem. Look what they've done. Look what they've achieved. And Pharaoh, on the other hand, is crying. He says, "Woe to me! Why did I let them go?" Lachach ne'emar vayihi beshalach Paro et ha'am. And that's why the Torah says, when Paro sent the people away, he lamented it and he chased them to bring them back. So the rabbis took a pasuk that's not necessarily the meaning of the original pasuk. The original text is Paro is just said that he lost such a labor force that cost him nothing. He had thousands or hundreds of thousands of slaves working for him and happy just for not being killed. And now he lost that. Now who's going to build his pyramids? The Egyptians forgot how to work in construction. Same thing as in Israel, with all the we used to have the Arabs work in construction, and then when the borders were closed, more or less, Israelis don't want to go into that. They bring what they call foreign workers from Romania, from China. Same thing in America. People got used to have other people work for them. It's hard to get back to the idea, I'm going to have to work manual labor, hard labor. This is what the original pasuk means. But the rabbis look at it from a historical perspective, and they say, Paro, now he regrets for letting them go, meaning that if he had known their true potential, he would use it correctly. And history showed us that nations that expelled the Jews, that treated them the same way that, not that Pharaoh expelled them, he had to send them away, but he didn't appreciate what they had to give to his country. Jews, throughout history, we lived in different countries. Sometimes we were brought there to boost the economy. Jews, the early Jews who came to Germany, were literally imported from Italy. The Bishop of Cologne sent a message to Jews in Italy, and he said, I want you to come because you're merchants, they had the international connection, and because they spoke Hebrew, they could connect with people wherever they went, and they were neither Christians nor Muslims, so they could move freely between Christendom and the Muslim world. So they had a reputation of good merchants. So they come to my city to boost the economy. And they came, and they were called Kamara Regis. They were like the king's treasury. They were like property of the king. And they had what is called privileges, which literally mean privileges, is private laws. There was a private set of laws dedicated only for Jews to protect them and protect their commercial rights and so on.
It's almost exactly what's happening today with the king of Morocco.
Yeah,
Morocco,
right.
The Moroccan king has a huge campaign of trying to bring Jews back to
And there's a good reason, exactly. I was going to use this also, the example of Morocco. It's like, it's almost 1,000 years apart. But what happened in Germany was that when the Crusades happened, the Jewish communities were decimated. Then the locals realized that they missed the commercial power of the Jews, and they tempted them again, come and live there. And historians say the only reason the Jews went back to live in Austria and Germany, whatever was not called, was a wide area, the Rhine Valley area, was because they had commercial opportunities there. They had vineyards, they had certain knowledge, and they were tempted to come back. But then again, they suffered. The same thing happened with in Spain. Right. Spanish economy, Spanish infrastructure was flourishing when the Jews were there under the Muslims, and then even under the Christian with Reconquista, when they took over, they still flourished. But when they decided to convert all the Jews by force, and they left, they didn't think that everyone was going to leave, but people left. Hundreds of thousands of people left the country, or converted to Christianity superficially, and then they couldn't practice what they did before. And as a result, all the intellectual power, the intelligentsia of Spain was wiped out in one generation, because they were all Jews, scientists, doctors, authors. Some people say that the reason that we find a sort of a revival of Spanish, not a revival, a new wave of Spanish literature after the expulsion is because Jews who didn't leave and remained as Marranos started writing in Spanish, like Miguel de Cervantes, the famous Don Quixote. That it was probably a Jew or or a descendant of Maranos. But other than that, they lost all this power, went to the Netherlands, to the Ottoman Empire, and to the New World. 500 years later, 1992, the king of Spain issued an official apology to all the Jews around the world. I was back then in my community in Bogota, and the Spanish ambassador came to the synagogue. We were sitting by the Echal, and we were reading prayers, and he issued an official apology, and I was thinking, of this midrash. And I said, when you kicked out the Jews of Spain, you didn't think of the consequences. You didn't care about us. You didn't. But even if you didn't care about us, from a selfish point of view, you should have kept the Jews in Spain. And you thought that we are going to be done with, and nobody's going to care. But 500 years later, you have to come back and publicly apologize. And now the Spanish government is actively trying to lure Jews back into Spain and some into Portugal, because they want to boost the economy. That's the main reason that they want to do that. It's not because of what is called in Spanish remordimiento de conciencia. That they have their conscience is bothering them. It's a practical reason. Now, Matis, you mentioned Morocco. There are a lot of facts in Morocco and also some legends about what happened when the Jews left. From a factual point of view, it was a blow to Morocco. People didn't think that the Jews are going to leave en masse. Same thing with Iraq and in Egypt and other places. Jews were, in many places, a balancing factor against Islamic fanaticism. But also they brought wealth in the economy, the commerce. In Iraq, for example, Jews were the deputy minister of finance was a Jew. Jews were in all high positions in the government. They were engineers, doctors. Same thing in Egypt. Same thing in Morocco. When the Jews left, they said that those are the facts. But the legends say, this is what my wife told me about the blue fish that was very common in the shores of Morocco. That the Moroccans today say that from the day the Jews left, there's no more fish. It says the fish was there as for the blessing of the Jews. So now I don't know if it's true or legend or what it mixed for them, the reality of missing the Jews among them, and the fact maybe they don't have more fish, but now they're trying to bring back the Jews into Morocco. So it's really interesting. I think very poignant midrash. If you read that, a very powerful statement that was made 2,000 years ago, not when we were at the height of our success, but rather persecution and destruction and all that. Rabbi Levi says, despite all that, we have something which is really an inherent power, and I think that's the idea of also of Am Yisrael as the chosen people. It's not that we're genetically superior, that we have better DNA or anything like that, but we were chosen by God to receive the Torah. And there was a certain moment in time where Am Yisrael gets together, receives the Torah, and that from now on, that becomes a defining factor of who a Jew is going to be. Just like we said yesterday when we spoke about the dress code and the language and the names. Those were external elements that were needed before Matan Torah. After Matan Torah, this is what defines us. So what the Torah gave us, beside the idea of serve God and pray and do mitzvot, all these are tools to enhance also our growth as human beings. And the key statement of Torah, love your brother as you love yourself. It means that you have to love yourself. You have to have self-confidence. You have to feel important because you have a mission in the world. And Jews believed in the future redemption. So they were always pushed to do more. Maximize your potential. Realize your potential. Use it to help others. Build communities wherever you go. Support each other. Teach your children. The Jewish education was ahead of its time. The first public school in the world was created in Eretz Israel about 2,000 years ago. When everywhere else, it was either you have time, extra time, to teach your son whatever you do, make him your apprentice, or you hire a pedagogue. Literally, the word pedagogy that we use today for education comes from the word pedagogus, child walker. It was an erudite, an educated slave that you would buy to teach your child. That was what rich people did. But in Eretz Israel, in the first century, Rabbi Yoshua ben Gamla instituted public schools because he saw that many parents cannot teach their children. Either they don't know or they can't afford it. So he created a system of public schools that until today, when you look at the parameters that they said there, is in line with modern education. They say you have to have no more than 25 kids in the classroom. If you have 40, you have to hire a teacher and an assistant. If you have 50, you have to break it into 2 classes. You have to make sure that the roads are safe, that everybody can bring their kids to school. You have to make sure that the teachers are knowledgeable and perform well, and that they don't rush through material to just say we've covered this and this and that. Amazing concept that we have in Jewish education almost 2,000 years ago. And then if you go through history, Jews always were learned, always pushed their children to learn more. And that in turn brought them to a higher achievement and higher position. It might have changed also at a certain point a little bit our DNA, because, and this is something that was that I read in a book by an American psychologist, not religious, his name is Teitelbaum, but it was from the famous family maybe. It's called Schmoozing in America. And he says that one of the possibilities that you do find Jews with superior intelligence, relatively, is that in the Jewish communities there was a focus on intelligence. So if there was an intelligent kid, the community would say, "Oh, this is the best shidduch. Everybody wants to marry this kid." So they look for someone who could support him and help him in his studies. He gets married, he has children. The children are supported, and eventually he'll go to work. But he built a family. Meanwhile, in the Christian more than the Muslim traditions, but in both of them, someone who was very brilliant was made a scholar, and as a scholar, he would become celibate and not marry, not have children. So technically, they killed off many of the intelligent people by not letting them transmit their DNA and their genes to the next generation. So all of this,
you become celibate?
Monks, priests, darwishes, fakirs, because of religious reasons, they dedicate all their life to study. That was the ideal of a holy man. You don't marry, or nuns, and so on. So the offspring was in Europe. Near every monastery in Europe, if you dig deep into the ground, you'll find, unfortunately, many remains of babies that were, illegal babies, illicit babies that were killed by their parents, nuns and monks. So they basically killed them all.
It sounds like intellectual prowess in society.
Yes, yeah. If you're an intellectual, you don't want to be a materialistic person. Yeah. You eschew all that. Martin Luther, the reformer, pushed against that, and Calvin's like the new wave in Europe were definitely against. They were very ascetic, the Puritans. So it's an interesting thing. Like I said, we go back to this midrash. It's sort of a prophecy that was really very deep and courageous at the time, but that's played itself over and over again in Jewish history.